Quarterly review was already running 12 minutes late when my badge stopped working. I stood there in the lobby of the building I had walked into 5 days a week for 9 years, pressing my key card against the reader, and nothing happened. The little light blinked red. I tried again. Red. The security guard at the front desk, a kid named Tommy who had watched me walk past him 1,000 times, looked up with this expression I still think about sometimes. Not confused. Just careful. "I'll have to call someone up, Miss Lawson," he said. "Miss Lawson." Like I was a visitor, I told him that was fine, and I stood there with my laptop bag on my shoulder and my coffee going cold in my hand while he made the call. 3 minutes. Then someone from the 17th floor came down to escort me up. A junior analyst I had personally hired 8 months earlier. She didn't make eye contact the whole ride up. That was a Tuesday in October. By then, it had been going on for 6 weeks. Let me back up because I know how this sounds. I know what you're thinking. If it was your company, why did you let any of this happen at all? And that's a fair question. I've asked it myself, usually at around 2 in the morning when I should be asleep. The answer is complicated and I'll get there. But first you need to understand what Northgate Analytics actually was and what it cost to build it. I started the company out of a spare bedroom in my apartment in Charlotte when I was 28 years old. My co-founder was my college roommate, a woman named Celeste. We had one client, a mid-sized logistics company that needed help cleaning up their data infrastructure. We worked 16-hour days and paid ourselves just enough to cover rent. Celeste left after 2 years. Her mother got sick. She needed stability, no hard feelings. I bought out her shares, took on the debt personally, and kept going. By year 4, we had 11 employees and a contract with a regional hospital system. By year 7, we had 63 employees, 3 offices, and a client list that included names you would recognize. I had built something real. Not a unicorn, not a tech darling, just a real company that solved real problems and showed up for its clients. Then we got the call about the government contract. It was a federal health data modernization project, multi-year, 8 figures, the kind of contract that changes the shape of a company permanently. We were a strong candidate. Our work in the hospital sector had given us exactly the right track record, but to compete at that level, the procurement committee made clear that they wanted to see institutional heft. A seasoned executive team, someone with a name in the government contracting space. My board, 3 people, all of whom I had personally selected, suggested bringing in a CEO. I want to be precise about what they said because the wording mattered. They didn't say replace me, they said complement. They said my technical credibility was an asset and that bringing in operational leadership would let me focus on what I was best at. They said it was a structural move, not a judgment. They said my equity, my founder shares, my board seat, none of that was changing. What they said and what happened were 2 different things. His name was Callum Reeve, 44, silver-haired, the kind of guy who wore his watch on the outside of his shirt cuff like it was a statement. He had spent 12 years at a defense contractor and had shepherded 2 government deals through procurement. On paper, he was exactly what the board said we needed. In the room, the first time I sat across from him, I felt something I couldn't name yet. Not dislike. More like watching someone measure your furniture without asking. The first month was fine. Callum was deferential, almost performatively so. He introduced himself to clients as a partner to our visionary founder. He CC'd me on everything. He asked my opinion in meetings. I told myself I had been wrong about that feeling in the room. The second month, he started reorganizing the client-facing teams for efficiency. New reporting structures, new communication protocols. He explained it all to me in the 30-minute briefing, very polished, very thorough. I had questions. He had answers. It seemed reasonable at the time. The third month, I started getting removed from calendar invites. Not all at once. That would have been obvious. It was incremental. A client strategy call I was usually on. I've got this one, just keeping your schedule light. A check-in with our government liaison. Wanted to give you a break from the admin stuff. A team all hands I had run every single month for 4 years. We're trying a new format. More execution-focused. By week 6 of month 3, I was being escorted up to my own office by a junior analyst I had hired. What I didn't tell anyone, not the board, not my lawyer, not Celeste, when she called to check in, was what I had found in the original contract. 3 weeks before Callum came on board, during the final rounds of due diligence for the government bid, I had been reviewing the intellectual property schedule on our primary service agreement with our anchor client, a health system called Meridian. Standard review. I do it every couple of years just to make sure everything is clean. There was a clause, buried in an exhibit, cross-reference to a subsection I had written myself 5 years earlier, in a different context and apparently carried forward without adjustment through 2 subsequent contract renewals. The clause said, in effect, that in the event of a change in primary executive leadership, Meridian held an option to renegotiate the core service terms, including pricing, including IP licensing. Nobody had flagged it. Not our outside counsel, not anyone on my team. I found it at 11:30 on a Tuesday night with a glass of wine I wasn't drinking anymore, sitting at my kitchen table, and I understood immediately what it meant if Callum started presenting himself as the person running Northgate. I printed the clause. I made a note in my own files, a physical notebook not in our system, and I decided to wait. I know that sounds cold. I know people hear that and think, why didn't you just go to the board? Why didn't you confront him? The answer is that I had already tried to flag concerns, smaller ones, earlier on, and the response I got was a version of you need to trust the process, you need to give him room, you need to remember why you brought him in. I had been told, very gently and very clearly, that my instincts were a liability. So I stopped sharing my instincts, and I started keeping records instead. Every email, every calendar removal, every meeting I was cut out of. Every time a client communication went out with his name at the top and mine nowhere on it. I kept it all in a folder I named Q4 Admin, so it looked boring if anyone glanced at my screen. Then, 6 weeks in, on the morning my badge stopped working, I made a phone call. His name was Terence. I had known him for 7 years. He was a partner at the law firm that had done Northgate's IP work from the beginning, and more relevantly, he had deep roots in federal procurement. We had grabbed lunch twice a year for as long as I could remember. He knew the company. He knew me. I told him I needed 45 minutes, and I needed it to stay between us for now. We met at a coffee shop 3 blocks from his office. I brought the folder and the notebook. I laid it out for him the way you lay out a case, not the way you describe a grievance. I showed him the Meridian clause. I showed him the pattern of removals. I showed him the IP filings from the past 90 days where my name had quietly migrated from founder and chief architect to a generic principal. I showed him the draft partnership agreement for the government bid, which listed Callum as primary signatory without a co-signature requirement from me, which would have been a first in the company's history. Terence was quiet for a long time. He drank his coffee. He read through everything twice. Then he said, "You understand this is actually worse than what you thought." "I know," I said. "The IP migration alone, I know." He looked at me. "How long have you been sitting on this?" "Long enough," I said. I needed the pattern to be undeniable. We spent the next 2 weeks preparing. Quietly, Terence pulled in a colleague from corporate litigation. Together they drafted a letter. Not aggressive, not threatening, just a very clean, very precise document that laid out what was mine, what couldn't be moved without my explicit written consent, and what the consequences would be if the government bid went forward with the current structure. The letter referenced the Meridian clause specifically and noted that an unauthorized change in primary executive leadership representation could trigger Meridian's renegotiation option, which would reduce the value of the government contract bid by an amount that would make the whole thing not worth pursuing. We didn't send it yet. What we did instead was set a meeting. Terence called my board chair, a man named Owen who had been with me since year 2 and who I genuinely believed had not understood what was happening. He said we needed a sit-down on the IP structure before the government bid went to final submission. He was careful about how he framed it. Not adversarial, not alarming, just a legal housekeeping item that needed to be resolved. The meeting was set for a Thursday. The government bid submission deadline was the following Monday. I knew Callum would be there. I knew he would come in expecting a routine review. I knew he had no idea about the Meridian clause because if he had, he would have moved faster, and he hadn't moved fast enough. The morning of the Thursday meeting, I got to the office at 7:30. I used the new visitor badge Tommy had started cutting for me. I had decided to find that funny, which helped. And I went up to the 17th floor, and I sat at my desk and I reviewed everything one more time. I had the printed clause. I had the IP filing records. I had the folder of documentation going back 6 weeks, and I had a single-page summary written by Terence that laid out exactly what my founder equity position entitled me to and what the company's articles of incorporation actually said about executive authority. Then I made myself a cup of coffee and I waited. The conference room had a long table. Owen was at the head. 2 other board members, a woman named Shirley and a man named Dex, were on one side. Callum came in with his deputy, a younger man whose name I always forget on purpose, and they sat down across from me and Terence. Callum nodded at me when he walked in. Polite, neutral. He had been doing that for 6 weeks, treating me with the precise level of courtesy that couldn't be called dismissive but communicated absolutely nothing. I nodded back. Owen opened the meeting. He said something about the bid timeline, the importance of clean documentation, wanting to make sure everything was in order before submission. Standard chair language. I watched Callum's face while Owen talked. He was relaxed. He had his notepad out, his pen uncapped. He thought this was a formality. Terence cleared his throat and said he wanted to start with the IP schedule. Callum's deputy opened his laptop. Callum leaned back slightly in his chair, comfortable, ready to be agreed with. Terence slid a copy of the Meridian clause to everyone at the table. The room went quiet while people read it. I watched Callum read it. I watched the moment he understood what it said. It wasn't dramatic. His face didn't fall. He was too practiced for that. But there was a stillness that came over him, the kind of stillness that happens when someone is rapidly calculating and not finding a way out. Owen looked up first. He looked at Callum. Did you know about this? I'd need to review the full contract history, Callum said. His voice was level. I gave him credit for that. The clause has been in the Meridian agreement since the second renewal, Terence said. 2020. It was drafted by our founder and it applies directly to the current situation. What situation specifically? Callum's deputy said. Terence placed the IP filing records on the table. These filings represent the core technology underlying the government bid. You'll see that over the past 60 days, the listed inventor and originating architect has been reclassified in external-facing documents in a way that is inconsistent with the company's IP assignment history. The deputy started to say something. Callum put his hand up, just slightly, and the deputy stopped. The government bid, Terence continued, as currently structured, lists our CEO as primary signatory. That designation, in combination with the Meridian clause, constitutes a representation of a change in primary executive leadership that would trigger Meridian's renegotiation option. At current contract values, that renegotiation exposure is approximately, he named a number, which exceeds the projected net value of the government contract itself. Shirley said, "What?" Dex said nothing. He was looking at the papers. Owen looked at me. It was the first time he had really looked at me in that meeting. "You've been sitting on this. I've been documenting it," I said. "There's a difference." There was a long silence. Not the uncomfortable kind. The kind where the math is being done by everyone in the room simultaneously and they're all arriving at the same answer. Callum set down his pen. He looked at the table for a moment. Then he looked at me. And whatever I had expected to see in that moment, anger, calculation, some kind of pivot, what I actually saw was something that looked almost like relief, like a man who had been pushing on a door that was locked the whole time and had finally stopped pushing. "What do you need to proceed with the submission?" he said. He wasn't talking to Terence, he was talking to me. "I'll spare you the legal mechanics of the next 48 hours because they were genuinely tedious and involved a lot of documents I never want to read again." The short version is that the government bid went out under the correct structure. My name appeared where it was supposed to appear. The IP filings were corrected. Terence sent a separate letter to the board, not the one we had prepared, a gentler version, outlining the corporate governance adjustments that needed to happen to clarify executive authority and founder protections going forward. Callum resigned 4 weeks later. It was announced as a mutual decision, which was technically accurate in the way that things are technically accurate when nobody wants to litigate. We got the government contract. It came through on a Wednesday afternoon, and my phone rang about 30 seconds after I saw the email. It was Owen. He sounded like a man who had been holding his breath for 2 months. "Congratulations," he said. "Thank you. I owe you an apology, actually." "You do," I said. "We can talk about that later." We did talk about it later, several times. I don't think Owen had known the full picture. I think he had wanted the deal badly enough that he had stopped asking certain questions. That's its own kind of failure, and he knows it. And I think we're going to be okay, but it took a while. The thing I think about most, now that it's over, is that moment when Callum set down his pen. Not the signing of anything. Not the announcement of the contract. That specific moment, when someone who had spent 6 weeks engineering my erasure from my own company sat across from me and asked what I needed. People ask me sometimes if I enjoyed it. The reversal. The moment in the room. Honestly, not the way you'd expect. What I felt was more like exhaustion. Like I'd been holding something very heavy for a very long time, and I had finally been allowed to put it down. There was no triumph in it. There was just the quiet of a room where the math had been done and the answer was undeniable, and everyone in it finally knew what I had known for 6 weeks. I had built this company. I had written those clauses. I had kept those records. And I had waited very carefully until the moment when walking away from me was more expensive than the alternative. That's not revenge. I don't think of it as revenge. Revenge is impulsive. What I did was patient. There's a difference. It took me a long time to learn it, and I'm not sorry I did. The day after the contract came through, I walked into the lobby, pressed my badge against the reader, and the light turned green. Tommy looked up. He smiled. "Good morning, Ms. Lawson," he said, and this time it sounded exactly right. People always want to know if I regret waiting as long as I did. 6 weeks is a long time to watch someone dismantle what you spent 9 years building, and most people, when I explain what was happening, assume I must have been paralyzed by it, scared maybe, or unsure of myself. I wasn't unsure of myself. I wasn't unsure. I was patient, which is a different thing entirely, and it took me a long time to understand that distinction. Here's what I've come to believe. Not from any philosophy I read or any advice someone gave me, but just from living through this particular experience. The way you respond to being underestimated is one of the most revealing things about you. Not to other people, to yourself. When Callum started cutting me out of meetings, when my badge stopped working in my own building, there was a version of me that wanted to walk into his office and make a scene. Wanted the drama of confrontation, the immediate satisfaction of saying you have no idea who you're dealing with. That impulse is human. I'm not judging it. But I've learned, slowly, the hard way, that acting from that place almost never gets you what you actually want. It gets you a release valve. It doesn't get you the contract. What I did instead was harder. It required me to hold 2 things at once, genuine calm and genuine fury. To be angry enough to keep documenting and composed enough not to tip my hand before the moment was right. That's not suppression, it's not denial. It's a kind of discipline that I had to earn through a lot of earlier failures where I didn't stay calm, where I pushed back too soon and gave someone the information they needed to work around me. The thing about Callum is that he wasn't unusual. That's the part that's hard to say out loud, but it's true. He was a type, the kind of person who moves through institutions by reading power structures and inserting himself into them, who mistakes access for ownership, who sees a woman who builds something quietly and decides quiet means weak. He had done it before. He would have done it again somewhere else. What stopped him wasn't my anger. It was a clause in a contract that I had written 5 years earlier, that I had found and kept and waited with, because I had finally developed enough patience and enough discipline to use it correctly. Terence told me once, in that coffee shop, that the most powerful position you can be in is the one where the other side thinks they've already won. I've thought about that a lot. Because Callum genuinely believed he had neutralized me, and that belief is exactly what made him stop being careful. He stopped double-checking the IP filings, he stopped asking what else I might have, he stopped wondering why I wasn't pushing back harder. He had written me off, and in doing so, he had handed me everything I needed. I think about the younger version of me, the one who worked 16-hour days in a spare bedroom, who took on the debt personally when my co-founder left, who showed up every single day when it would have been easier not to. That woman built something real. And what I owed her through all of those 6 weeks, was not to throw what she built away on a moment of satisfying anger. The morning my badge turned green again, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt like I had finally paid a debt to the company, yes, but mostly to myself.